All right, well, I'm going to invite us into a practice of accessing spiritual power using practice number 1. And what I'm going to invite us to do is I'm going to slowly read through the 4 dimensions of the practice. And you might remember that in each one of the dimensions, the first part is acknowledging maybe the destructive powers or the distortion that we live with that often prevents us from accessing spiritual power, prevents us or prevents others. And then the second part is the intention of what we are seeking, what we are accessing. And so what I'm going to invite us to do is when I read the first part, the acknowledging part, I'm just going to invite you to put your hands out, like we're just coming clean. We acknowledge that we participate in these destructive powers in different ways, consciously and unconsciously. And then when we get to the second part, then I'm going to invite you to just pull your hands back to your heart, to remind us of what we are seeking, what we are claiming, what we are intending for this. So I invite you to just close your eyes, and then you'll feel the rhythm of the 4 dimensions. You can start with your hands on your heart. Today, as we gather, we access spiritual power by consciously connecting with the indwelling God to rediscover our belovedness, our God-given power, and our place within God's evolving universe. So take a moment and just soak that in. Our belovedness, our God-given power, our place within God's evolving universe. And placing our hands out, palms up. In the personal dimension, we acknowledge and name the destructive powers we experience in our lives. All those systems and patterns that work against us and work against others and life as a whole. And drawing our hands back to our hearts, we instead seek the God of love, whose life-giving power is accessible through our embodied experience in creation. Just breathe in that truth. Placing our hands back out again. In the interpersonal dimension, we acknowledge the ways that we isolate ourselves and objectify others. That's often a difficult one for us to acknowledge, the ways that we objectify others and isolate ourselves, often in ways that seem normal because our culture has normalized these things. And drawing our hands back to our hearts, we instead access the power of love by awakening to God's indwelling presence in the people and other members of God's creation we encounter. So in this moment, just take a mental scan of just all the people and the creatures you've encountered today. Recognizing God's indwelling presence in every single one. And offering our hands out again. In the faith community dimension, we acknowledge the ways that we have allowed our scriptures and traditions to be misused as weapons against many. That one often is a difficult one to swallow. It's difficult because it happens, and it's also difficult to see how we have participated in allowing that to happen. So in this moment, we just acknowledge and confess. And taking our hands back to our hearts, we instead access the power of the God of love to reclaim the rituals and resources of our faiths, to honor human dignity and the integrity of creation. And finally, in the public sphere, we acknowledge with our hands out our collective failures in acting for justice. We just acknowledge it. But even as we acknowledge our collective failures in acting for justice, we draw our hands to our hearts, and we instead access the power of the indwelling God of love, who works through public efforts to advance human and environmental justice. The God of our faith, the God of Jesus, is the God of liberation, is the God of creation. And so anytime and every time we allow ourselves to participate in that work for human and environmental justice, however small, however fumbling sometimes, not knowing our way, in the very human work of working for justice, God moves. Because this God of creation and liberation is right here. Dwelling within us and within all. and for the precious opportunity to be able to give our life energy and our power, our God-given power, to this great work of the God of liberation and the God of creation. We give thanks and we say amen.
Amen.